from the Latin American Forum for Research Assessment, FOLEC, from CLACSO, we have the pleasure to interview today Peter Suber, Senior Advisor on Open Access from the Harvard Library. He's one of the leading international specialists in open access and was involved in the drafting of the first Budapest Open Access Initiative statement in 2002, when the open access concept was coined. He had a key role in the drafting the fine print of the BOAI 20th anniversary. So very welcome, Peter, to the floor. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Laura. It's good to be here.
Well, to start with this interview, let me ask you that the BOAI 20th anniversary recommendations, as Eduardo Aguado, president from Redalic, has said, are an intelligent, clear, bold, strong statement. It means a clear boost to non-commercial academic publication to regain control of journals and research assessment. It brings optimism to developing regions about the possible better future for open access. For you, Peter, working in one of the leading research universities in the world, Harvard University, which is your perception of understanding in that context about what is mentioned in the introduction of the BOAI 20th anniversary? And notice that in that statement, there is a mention that we know more today than ever did about the damage caused by a propitiatory infrastructure, commercial control of access to research, commercial control of research evaluation indicators, journal-based research metrics, journal rankings, journal business models that exclude authors for financial reasons, just as subscription journals exclude readers from financial research. Embargoes on open access repositories excludes rights for publishers. When BOAI 20th anniversary mentions we know more, do you perceive that the leading research institutions in the world are aware of the present and potential damage?
That's a good question. First of all, when we said we know more today about those things than we knew 20 years ago, that was the big we, the global we. Academics, particularly research institutions and funders, know more about those things today than 20 years ago. Just to start, though, if you're asking about Harvard, Harvard is on board with this. Harvard is a strong supporter of open access and open infrastructure. The Harvard Library released a public statement in 2020 recommending that we reduce our use of APCs and that we advance toward open infrastructure, and that we support Diamond Open Access journals, which is another recommendation of BOAI 20. In fact, Harvard Library was the first library in the world to endorse the Diamond OA Action Plan. It has since been endorsed by many other libraries. We formerly had a fund to pay APCs to Harvard affiliates who chose to publish in APC-based journals, but we laid it down during the pandemic and we don't plan to revive it. And one reason is that we are now working more for Diamond or no-fee open access journals than for APC-based journals. And as for embargoes, Harvard was the first university to adopt a rights retention open access policy that lets us disregard publisher embargoes on green open access. So once we get our hands on the right file, we can make it open access as soon as we can. We don't have to wait for the publisher embargo to run. But you also asked whether other research institutions are aware of those problems, and are they sufficiently aware of it? And the answer is they are aware to some extent, but not enough, absolutely not enough. The awareness needs to grow. But one reason I'm saying that there is some awareness and that it's growing is that every week I see more criticism of APCs and criticism of read and publish agreements. And these are from academics who not only speak in public where I can see their comments, but are also undoubtedly speaking within their own institutions. So the awareness is growing. Obviously, APCs and read and publish agreements have their own momentum, but the criticism of them is also gaining momentum. And that means the awareness within other research institutions is also growing.
Okay, and which motives of optimism do you have for the support of the BOAI 20 will receive in the context, and which concerns do you have?
I am optimistic about the progress of open access, but it's more about progress in general, not specifically about the impact of the Budapest 20th anniversary recommendations. For example, we're making progress now. We have been making it for 20 years. I think the rate of progress is slower than we would like, but there's no doubt that we've been making progress. But the problems that we're trying to solve persist. And there's a kind of perverse ground for optimism here. The persistence of these problems reminds us to address them. The solutions are evolving, and better practices are evolving, and we are a reflective community. We are academics, and we try to learn the lessons from our predecessors. So as the problems remind us that they're not adequately solved or not completely solved, and as we learn more about what works and what does not work, our solutions will get better and better. Another way to put it, if you're bleeding from the ears, you won't stop thinking about how to address that problem. But I can be more specific in grounds for optimism. I think more and more individual researchers and scientists and authors are paying attention to open access and understanding their options for open access, and they're making good choices. This matters because authors control the growth of open access and the rate of that growth. For example, authors decide whether to submit their new work to open access journals or not. They decide whether to deposit a copy of their work in an open access repository or not. That goes for preprint repositories as well. And they decide how to dispose of their copyrights. And then alongside that, more and more universities and funders are adopting good policies to influence author choices. And I think of all the institutions that are in a position to influence author choices, universities and funders are at the top of the list. So growing awareness among authors themselves and growing good practices and good policies at universities and funders are nudging things in the right direction.
Okay, in recent times, many global science organizations such as UNESCO, the International Science Council, and the Global Research Council have addressed concerns about responsible research assessment practices in the transition towards open science. How could we all make stronger the messages from the BOAI 20th anniversary recommendations in that global context and debates?
I actually think this is hard. If the question is how do we amplify the message about reforming research assessment, I think that's hard. You're right that many important organizations have already spoken in favor of that kind of reform, but making the message louder, making it more effective is difficult. One reason, at least in the United States, is that promotion and tenure committees at universities are based in departments. Most universities do not want to regulate promotion and tenure from the top down, or at least they want to do it in the minimal way and leave the important questions up to departments. And that means we have to have a very large number of individual conversations with individual departments. That's very time consuming, it's very difficult. I've been doing some of that here at my institution, but if we want to do it at all universities, it's a huge job. It will take a long time. And my impression is that it's not always that difficult outside the United States, where there is more greater possibility for regulation at the university level. I hope things are closer to that in Latin America than they are in the United States. But another reason this is difficult is that when we talk about reforming research assessment, we're talking about changing research culture. And that's hard to do. I'm not saying that changing culture is harder than changing law or technology or economics. I'm just saying that changing culture is slow and it's difficult and it's indirect. It's not even clear what strategies we have to adopt in order to change culture. even though we have some ideas, it's not as easy as knowing what strategies to adopt in order to design a new technology platform that has certain features.
And in relation to the point 4 of the BOAI 20th anniversary, which mentions that when spend money to publish in open access research, remember the goals to which open access is the means, looking for more equity, equality, usability, sustainability of research. What is your opinion on the influence transformative agreements and APC business models in the North are having in the perceptions developing regions have or could have about what is a good practice to advance open access, distracting decisions and budgets needed to address the BOAI recommendation? For example, the recent signing of a transformative agreement by some universities in our region, like the UNAM in Mexico, and national consortiums that make national deals with big commercial publishers for all universities of a country. For example, the recent Colombian National Consortium agreement with several big publishers, agreements that include APC discounts.
Yes, as you can tell, the BOAI 20th anniversary recommendations want us to move away from APCs and move away from read and publish agreements. I can comment more specifically on your question, but first I have to say that I'm speaking for myself. The document came from the steering committee, and by the way, Dominique Babini, who was one of the organizers of this event, was on the steering committee. I thank her very much for her participation. But we didn't convene to answer this sort of follow-up question. And so I can follow up myself, but I'm just speaking for myself. For me, the language of the document is important. It says move away from APCs and move away from read and publish agreements. It doesn't say stop them today. By the way, I think some other members of the committee would have said stop them today, but we agreed to put it this way. And one reason I'm happy to put it that way is that I don't think we can stop them today or tomorrow. I think it's a long game. We have to recognize that it's a long-term goal and we can make continual progress toward it, but success will not come quickly. One reason is that read and publish agreements, for example, can be a good deal for universities. They can provide more open access to the research published by those faculty members at roughly the same cost or sometimes less cost than they could have made them open access otherwise. These deals can also be good deals for the publishers because they tend to steer new open access research to them, to those publishers, rather than to other publishers. So insofar as they're good deals for universities and funders, publishers, we should not expect them to stop anytime soon. On the contrary, we should expect them to keep growing. Our argument in the BOAI 20 document was that these gains, which are gains, come at the expense of long-term goals like equity and sustainability. In fact, I think there is short-term growth coming from the read and publish agreements, but I think it comes at the expense of long-term growth because I think these deals are not sustainable. The recommendation to move away from APCs and read and publish agreements were 2 out of 4 recommendations. We deliberately limited ourselves to just 4 recommendations when we had hundreds of good ideas on what we could do, but we wanted to single out these 4 as the most important. And in my view, these 2 particular recommendations presuppose progress on the other 2 recommendations, open infrastructure and reforming research assessment. For example, on reforming research assessment, just to make a long story short, suppose we succeeded and we really stopped caring about where research was published or how it was published and cared only about the quality of that research. Well, if we got to that point, then we certainly wouldn't pay for another read and publish agreement. We wouldn't pay any more APCs. But we're not going to get to that point today or tomorrow. Again, it's cultural change. And so when we play the long game on that front, we won't be reforming research assessment in the right way, to the right degree, anytime soon. Therefore, we won't be in a position to drop APCs or read and publish agreements anytime soon either. But when we realize the connection, that should help motivate us to work faster or harder or more effectively toward research reform so that we can accomplish these goals. In most of my advocacy, I focus on short-term goals because by their nature, they're the next steps. They're the steps that we can take today and ought to take today. The BOA 20 document was a chance to step back and focus on long-term goals. And it's not usually my style to talk about long-term goals that we cannot achieve today or tomorrow. But if we know what they are, and if we keep our eyes on them, then we can remember why we're taking the next steps that are appropriate for today and tomorrow.
And finally, Peter, do you have any personal message for open access initiatives and specialists in Latin America concerned about the trends towards commercialization of open access, its infrastructures, and open access indicators for research assessment, and how we could make stronger the global voice in support of investments and good practices in the specific Budapest Open Access Initiative's 20th anniversary recommendations?
Yes. First, I would say that trends toward commercialization of open access are partly due to publishers who want to profit from open access, and partly due to universities who are willing to pay those publishers. Now, stepping back, I can't really criticize publishers who want to profit from open access, especially for-profit publishers. That's what they do. In fact, we shouldn't have been surprised that they are trying to do this. And some people were not surprised. Some people predicted it. I would point out that this is a step forward from their previous position, which was to stop open access or to undermine it, to derail it at all costs. I think we sometimes forget in 2022 how bitterly publishers lobbied national governments to block open access, especially from government funding agencies. So they moved from a position of trying to block it to trying to profit from it. And some of them are succeeding at profiting from it, which is another way of giving them a reason to support it and cultivate it. I don't like these commercial trends. As you can tell from the BOAI 20 document, I want open access research to be hosted and published by nonprofit open source infrastructure. Nevertheless, the publisher aim to profit from it is a step forward from trying to stop it altogether. But while I cannot criticize publishers for trying to profit from it, I can criticize universities for their willingness to pay them. And you can see this from our critique of APCs and read and publish agreements in the BOAI 20 document. Now, this criticism is subject to the qualifications that I gave in my previous answer, that the right reforms that would make it possible for us to stop paying those publishers are over the horizon. They're not something we can realize tomorrow. And so we have to adopt interim solutions while we work toward these long-term solutions. One interim solution that's available today and has been available for the entire history of open access is green open access or repository-based open access. We should embrace it today more than we already are. We should make better use of it today than we already are. Diamond open access is not quite as easy to take full advantage of as green. On the other hand, it's much easier to take full advantage of than APC-based open access. So we ought to embrace that too. It's another fairly short-term strategy compared to the long-term strategies of research assessment reform and universally adequate open infrastructure. Finally, just to get back to the question about Latin America, Latin America has been a leader in diamond open access. And your question was, what can Latin America in particular do? One thing it can do is to stay the course on diamond open access, because by providing and maintaining diamond no-fee open access journals all these years, you have proved that it is sustainable. That has influenced the rest of the world. And so by continuing to show that it's sustainable, that they are capable of long-term survival, not just short-term survival, you will continue to influence the world. I hope the world imitates Latin America in its priority for no fee or diamond open.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. It was a great contribution for our panel and the conference to strengthen open access in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laura.